Hi everyone, welcome back to Rabbi's Reflection. I'm glad that you're joining with me today. We'll be continuing in our study of Kitchen Table Wisdom by Dr. Naomi Remen, and today reading the story, Who is That Masked Man? Stay with us as we read through the story and then offer some reflections. At one point, two surgeons who were respected faculty at a nearby medical school were both patients of mine in my counseling practice. Each had come because of loneliness, depression, and burnout. Neither was aware that the other was also here seeking help. As time went by, both men talked to me about the deep caring they felt they could not show to their patients or speak of to other physicians. Sometimes when things did not go well in the operating room or they lost a patient, they would share their feelings. Like myself, both of these men were trained to consider such behavior unprofessional, even unmanly. They felt alone with these emotions and isolated from other physicians because of them. In the safety of my office, they would also allow themselves the freedom to wonder aloud about things that were beyond proof. Was there something more mysterious, less scientific, that explained why some surgeons got better results than others? Were there unknown factors that promoted survival? They would muse about the will to live and worry about operating on patients who believed they were going to die. They would share stories about their patients with me, marveling at the strength with which people recovered or learned to live well despite terrible loss. These two men had been professional partners for more than 20 years. They shared a receptionist, a staff of nurses, an office, but they didn't know each other. They shared a therapist, too. But I was ethically bound not to tell either about the other's visits, or even that they were both my patients. I would encourage each of them to talk to his partner about these things, but I'd get the same response every time. Him? Heavens, he would just laugh. Like people with cancer, physicians often feel isolated from others by the nature of their experiences. They are also isolated from each other by the codes of professionalism. In the physician training workshops I facilitate, loneliness becomes apparent in many different ways. During one of the sessions, a gastroenterologist talked of the unexpected death of one of his patients. Although it had happened years ago, the pain was still acute, and in the circle of physicians he began to cry. The others were very moved. Afterwards, he told us that he had never cried about it before, and he felt a great deal better. One of the others asked him why he had not cried. He said that it had seemed to him to be the sort of thing that only another physician could understand. And who would cry in front of another physician? We all understood instantly. Loneliness often emerges symbolically in these workshops as well. When asked to create a sand tray about his role as a physician, John, an oncological surgeon, constructed the following scene in the sand. Farthest away from himself, he placed the open jaws of a shark. Between this and himself, he placed a group of small clay figures in a circle. Among these figures, there was a man bowed down in despair, a woman with one breast. On her knees with her arms upflung in prayer, another woman trying to hide with her hands the big hole where her heart should be, and a man with arms outstretched to ward off some unseen disaster. In the center of these figures, he put a bit of burning incense, saying that its smoke represented the healing that was happening among these wounded people because they had each other. Closest to himself, he placed a kachina doll, in the Native American tradition, a carved representation of an aspect of the spirit of healing. Interestingly, over time, several physicians in different study groups have selected the same figure to represent themselves. Hundreds of people with cancer have used these same sand tray objects. They also use this figure, but most commonly they use it to represent healing. The doctor's choice of this particular sand tray figure is especially significant because it is cracked and broken. John placed a paper surgical mask in the sand between the kachina and the circle of figures, hiding the doll from their view. From behind the mask, the doll had an unobstructed view only of the shark. I wonder if he had meant to show us so graphically the position from which he did his work. As he confronts cancer, his wounded self is isolated and invisible. The people he serves see only his surgical mask. His only clear view is of the disease. It was a poignant tray. When asked to describe the meaning of what he had done, he offered the following interpretation. "There is threat," he said, pointing to the shark. "These figures are wounded people, my patients. In their midst is a place of healing. And here I am. Behind my surgical mask, I am wounded also. I am missing my left ear. Behind my skills, my knowledge, I am hiding. Only the shark can see me. It knows I am here." When asked to find a word that summarized his tray, he said, "alone." At the close of this exercise, people have an opportunity to make any changes they wish in their own tray. John moved the broken Kachina doll from behind the surgical mask and placed it in the inner circle of other wounded figures. His eyes grew red, but he did not cry. The other physicians watching were visibly affected by John's contribution to the sand tray exercise. Afterwards, they discussed it for hours. Others had felt as lonely, but they had not been able to speak of it before. In this week's story that we explore, we learn about Dr. Remen's counseling practice. If you've been following along with us, the various stories from week to week, we know that Dr. Remen holds a unique place in medicine for physicians. Not only was she trained and worked as a doctor, but so much of her work was focused on kind of the holistic being and the holistic way of providing care for someone. That extended to an extent that she would think about, how do you train doctors to do the work that they do? Not the technical, nitty-gritty physician, I shouldn't say physician side because she would argue with that, the kind of technical side, but the spiritual side, the artistic side, the feeling side of their work. And so we've seen a couple of stories about this, but this is another one of those stories, and it brings such important lessons to us. I think this is valuable for us to think about, even for myself and for, I imagine, many of us who have not been doctors and are not doctors. But how do we bring ourselves to our work, to our practice in our lives? The physicians, at least the physicians in the beginning of the story that Dr. Remen is both counseling, these colleagues, speak about that there is a caring side to them that they cannot bring to their patients and neither display or show to their patients or to their colleagues. And so this is true just for doctors, and I think in particular, but probably for many of us as well. We cannot bring our whole selves to the work that we do. What's expected of us in our professional realms is to be professional. And what does that mean when we say professional? It means to not bring your feelings to work. Because somehow when you bring your feelings, when you bring your emotions, probably your joys and your disappointments, to work, that's going to mess things up. It's going to muddle the waters. It's going to make you an ineffective worker. We just want efficiency, and we want you to get the job done. But for many of these physicians, and I'm going to argue as well for all of us, we realize that there's a whole lot to life, and there's a whole lot to our work that we bring that's more than just the facts, right? Just the technical things that we need to do. For these doctors, they were struggling with things that were beyond proof. So much of their work is with life and death, with sickness and recovery, and so much of those pieces are unexplainable. And so they're struggling with how do they grapple with, how do they think about and talk about these things that are beyond proof. To such an extent that they feel like the two physicians don't even know each other. They've worked in the same office for 20 years. They share the same space. They share the same staff, but they don't really know each other. And so that can create a sense of feeling isolated and a sense of feeling lonely. And I imagine for all of us, there is a sense of loneliness when we're not able to bring our full and truest selves, our authentic selves, to our lives in all aspects. It could be our work lives, but also our lives full of relationships. Very tellingly, in the second part of kind of the story that Dr. Remen brings with the particular workshop, she speaks of a doctor who creates kind of an image of what his work life is like. And the doctor's only clear view in that image is of the disease itself. It's not of the people. The people are blocked away from him. But the doctor has a direct view, if you'll remember from the story, of the shark, of the disease. So that's what the doctor is facing. And the doctor explains, there's a whole life to me that's behind my surgical mask. I'm wounded as well. I struggle too. But I can't bring that with me to my work. And so Dr. Remen, through her wisdom and through her guidance, is trying to encourage these doctors, and I extend that to all of us, to bring ourselves to our lives, to bring both the blessings of who we are, but also the challenges, to know that when we can bring ourselves what is maybe a little bit broken or needs fixing, we can find that healing and that connection with someone else when we bring that out, when we are present with that. When we are true to ourselves, and then, in turn, true to our friends, to our families, to our communities. So I hope it is a time of reflection for you, and a time, perhaps this week, where you think about interacting with others and bringing your true self. Have a good one.